All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll begin our class. Heavenly Father, we're thankful this morning to be together. Bless this class, bless our efforts to understand your will, and help us to have a strong desire to obey you in all things. In Christ's name, amen. All right, so we're in the book of 1 Peter. We're studying, as you see, and we've been looking at the book under this chart, which is, these are the paragraphs in the book, and I divide it up into the three sections: salvation, submission, and suffering. And these are the simple titles, just from a simple reading of each of the paragraphs. So this morning, we want to begin here. I don't think it's very clear, but chapter 2, verse 18 is where we're going to start this morning. I don't know if you can see it's highlighted, but which is Christ's example of submission. In the verse that we looked at last week, or week before last, I guess it would be, up through verse 17, he tells us to be in submission to the king and to rulers and honor the king and so forth. And so now he's going to expand on that idea in a broader sense and talk about servants. Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. So servants, this is just the simple word for servant, and probably most specifically in the context refers to people that were what we would call slaves. Not every slave in the world or in the ancient world was a slave in chains at the bottom of a ship, but they were still slaves. They were bound to a master, either for a certain number of years as a servant or an indentured servant to pay a debt, or they were owned by a master and he took care of them and they served him, either sometimes by educating the children, sometimes by cooking, sometimes by working in the field, and so forth. Those were probably the majority of the slaves in the Roman Empire. And then there were the slaves who were, as I say, because they're prisoners or because they were captives in war, they were chained to the bottom of a ship, or they were treated pretty harshly. And just like every other human relationship, you have some masters who were good and gentle, and you have some masters who were harsh. And Paul speaks to Christians. Now, this was a common thing. In the city of Rome, I read that during the time of the New Testament, 2 out of every 3 people were servants of some kind. Only a small percentage of people were freed men. So it wasn't just one ethnic group or one group. It was very common because of the nature of it. And you know, plus or minus, you can debate the same thing with polygamy. There's pluses to polygamy, there's minuses with polygamy. Same thing is true with being a servant. Pluses and minuses. A lot of people had no other way to survive except be a servant to somebody else. They had no way to make a living, no way to survive, to get food and shelter, except by serving another man and binding himself to him. And if the man was a good man, they did bind themselves to him. I think my brother has workers like that. He's a contractor out in the Glades. I think he has workers like that. Man, they have stayed loyal to him for 40 or 50 years because he pays them better than other people and treats them well. And they won't work for anybody else. Are they his servants? Well, no, he pays them. But I mean, they are dedicated to him, and that's the way it became. So some of these relationships were more familial. Others were very harsh. We can't paint a blanket picture. Now, American slavery was probably more harsh than some of the forms in the Roman Empire in general. And yet, many, many hundreds of thousands of people who came to North America from Europe and other places were indentured servants, and they served for a period of time under a master, and they performed certain tasks, and they were not chained or anything like that. But yet, many were. So we have a much harsher view of slavery than was necessarily common. On the other hand, many of these slaves of the Romans and Greeks were not treated well at all. And when you went down further into Africa, and the slavery there was very bad. It was very negative, very harsh. And so you see, this is just the way the world's been. Now, servant then. I think, though, if you want to make this application in a more modern way, You have to look at it and say, what does he mean by servant? Well, it means any of us who will find ourselves under the authority of somebody else. How many of you here are not under authority to anybody? Raise your hands. Nobody? You're not under authority to anybody? Not even Tremaine?
Well, that's true.
Well, okay. Well, now we just stop that one.
I was thinking in the employment.
Well, you mean there's nobody? Tremaine's not here, so you can say what you want. He is here. You made him sit somewhere else. Oh, okay. You mean you don't have anybody you don't have anybody in your work you have to answer to? No customers, nobody? No suppliers, no.
It's me. But I do have to, it's a partnership. Right? But I run the partnership.
Partnership.
So different.
All of
it. Though, yes.
All right, now I'm not trying to stretch it out here. I know what you're saying. I'm saying all of us in some relationships are in service to somebody else. We have to do what they want. We have to bow to them to some degree. And we certainly are servants to law enforcement to a degree. We shouldn't be in some ways, but we are. And so this is a somewhat, sorry Tremaine, we just tried to straighten a few things out. I tried to help you out here, but you'll have to get the video and see what. I tried. All right. See, you just didn't know a few things, Tremaine. So we'll try to. Anyway, most people find themselves as servants of some sort. We have people that we answer to. Now that doesn't mean that we think we're inferior to them just because they're our boss. I know that's how the world wants to present it. If you're in submission to your husband, it means he thinks he's superior to you. No. As a person, no. Now he has to. If your boss is your boss, he is superior to you with respect to authority in that job. That's why he's called the boss. He has authority, therefore he is superior to you with respect to that authority. But not as far as personhood. We don't get this confused in normal life. We don't think because we take a job from somebody that those people are better than us. We just think that we work for them. And maybe this is unique to the United States. I don't really think. I think it's human. But he says here, Christians, you servants, you be submissive to your masters with all fear or respect. The word fear here probably is more conveyed in our term of respect, although in some masters it should be fear, real fear. Not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. Now we're taught in the United States, in modern times, that the only people that we should ever respect are people that are nice to us, that do what we want. That's not what the Bible says. We're taught that if your husband does not treat you well, you don't owe him any submission or obedience. If he doesn't treat you the way you want to, you don't have to be in submission. We're taught that you only have to be in submission to husbands that do what you want. And we're kind of taught that we're supposed to be only do what our boss wants, our master wants. If he does what we want, then we'll be nice to him. I don't think I'm wrong about this in a broad sense. Is that what this says? See that word harsh there? I think some versions use froward. There are modern versions that use the word abusive. Abuse, oh no, abuse. It's abuse. Everything's abuse. He says you have to be in submission to even when masters are abusive. This is pretty radical. You all are silent. What do you think about that? What does this mean? Can we flesh this out a little bit? Can you go beyond that? He says you have to submit to your masters with all respect, even when they are harsh. I think that goes against human nature entirely. My nature, and I'm the worst at this. You all don't know me. You don't realize what a rebel I am. What are you shaking your head for, Brian?
No, sorry.
They don't realize, do they? I just, this is against my nature. I'm an American. So, I don't even like so many of the ones that are gentle. Okay, let's just put it that way. Much less the ones that are harsh. So, this is a challenge for us to think about, really is. Christians should be ones who, when they find themselves in a subordinate position, which you will many times in life, many circumstances, you treat that with respect. You're not too good to submit to somebody else. You're not too good to give up your will for somebody else's will. You're not too good to even be abused at times. You're not too good to be abused and take abuse. So this runs against the grain of everything we've learned in the last 50 years in our society, with feminism in particular. This goes against the grain of that. And he's going to make that very clear pretty soon here. But he says this is commendable. If because of conscience toward God one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. It's one thing to suffer if you deserve it, he says. What credit is it if you are beaten for your faults? And that word beaten literally means be beaten. It means buffet, hit. If you are beaten for your faults and you take it patiently, what credit is it to you? There's no credit. Kid does something wrong and you give him a whipping and he endures the whipping. Has he earned some great credit? Not really. He got what he deserved. I got whipped by my dad and I deserved it. I don't think I got one whipping that I didn't deserve. I got one whipping I didn't deserve. My dad didn't believe something I told him. He whipped me anyway because he said I needed it. He found out later that he was wrong. I told the truth. And he came and apologized to me for whipping me. Which told me the other times I deserved it. Which I did. I didn't like it. But he says, what credit is if you have a fault and you get punished for it and you take it? Well, it's no credit. But when you do good and you suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. This is so opposite of any normal human thinking, especially any modern thinking, that we should take wrongful suffering gracefully. And I'm saying that because that's what I see, but this is pretty plain here. Is this hard to understand? Now, I'm not saying, is it easy to understand how to do it? Is it hard to understand these words? It really isn't hard to understand the words. Is it hard to do what the words say? Absolutely hard. And this is a key part of this book. This is one of the key parts. The next section is maybe more so, but because he's going to expand on this. But he's saying here, yes, you might be disciplined or beaten by life, by things that are your fault, and you deserve it, and you should take it patiently. And then sometimes things are going to happen that you do not deserve, that are not your fault, that you are innocent of, and you should take that patiently. I don't think this means you can't complain about it in the sense of saying this is an injustice and say this is unjust. I don't think he means you can't say anything about it. I think he means you take it with grace. And he's going to illustrate this later by being threatening in return, by threatening and other things like that we do when we get, yes, ma'am.
So I think it's very difficult to take it patiently and to take it repeatedly, right? As believers, and in some instances, it reminds me of when I used to work at Piper Aircraft. I think we both struggled with this one. I met my husband at Piper Aircraft, and the system was really toxic. It was just not healthy at all. But I had just borrowed money from my parents when I first moved here, and there was no leaving.
How many businesses are healthy?
Right. So to my point,
in our view, none.
Yes,
Go ahead.
So to my point, we're in this environment where we know that there's, things that are not right that are happening to us, and how we handle ourselves. People are like, oh, I can't believe you didn't do this or you
Now that's the position these servants back then fell into. They couldn't just say, oh, you're a toxic master. I think I'm going to go away. You know, that didn't work very well. But we can, in some general sense, big picture, do that in the United States. We can do that. Not easily sometimes, but you're right. It's difficult to do. So how do people react to that? How did people react, Dee Dee? How did they react there, being stuck in a situation that they thought was bad?
Well, us.
Huh?
How do we feel about it?
No. I in general, around you. There's going to be a react. You can't have an action without a reaction.
Yes.
They were probably threatening. They were cursing. They were slandering.
Yes.
They were sabotaging,
Yes.
undermining things.
Yes.
They were doing. All these wicked behaviors were the result of that.
Yeah.
Now, this is what God is saying no to. This is what He means by taking it patiently. The tendency is to react to this bad situation with other stuff that's just as bad or worse on your part.
Right. He
says, no, you can't do that. Other people will around you, but you can't do that. And so this is and then they're going to criticize you for that, right? Because you don't join them in this wickedness. You'll be criticized for that. So it's not an easy thing to do. And I'm not trying to act like this is just obviously easy. This is a very difficult thing. Even in a free society, this is difficult, much less a society where it was perfectly legal to mistreat your slaves. Not a problem. Now, there have been, in Israel, when they had servants, they weren't allowed to mistreat them. But in Rome, they were. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't, but they weren't allowed to in Israel to mistreat slaves or servants. But they did in other parts of the world, for sure. Because they viewed other ethnicities, other nations, as being not quite human. When you meet somebody named Barbara, I've told you this before, their name means barbarian, meaning that's a Greek word, means in New Testament times, that was somebody who was not a Greek. Was a barbarian. If you're not a Greek, you're a barbarian. Because they said these people, these other nations, they're not Greek, they're dogs. Bark, 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 bark. So they use that. It's an onomatopoeia for dogs barking. Because that's what other languages besides Greek sound like to the Greeks. And so they're barbarians. The Greeks certainly, those terrible Greeks. Well, but every other country on earth, every other nation of people on earth felt the same way about all the other nations for the most part. They're all not quite human, not as good as us. And if you think it's bad now, it was really bad then. And the Jews were maybe the worst in how they felt about other nations. They shouldn't have been, but they were. And so that's why they treated these servants. That's why there was no laws against how you treat your servants, because often they were other ethnicities or nations of people and so forth. And so you could treat them, they were your servant. And Christians found themselves then in this mix. Now he's going to go on to talk more about this in a minute, a little bit more than he is here. But I think it is interesting. It's commendable because of conscience toward God that you endure grief. So the reason that Christians endure grief and suffer wrong is because of our wanting to have a good conscience toward God. He just told you rebellious and insolent and damn hurtful to your master. So now you have to have a good conscience and live and do what's right. So I got the feeling that you two can look back at Piper with a good conscience. Even though it wasn't a pleasant experience, right? You have a good conscience toward how you acted? I mean, yeah, you did the right thing as best you could. Wasn't pleasant, but you endured grief, suffering wrongfully.
Well, let me say this.
Okay.
Let me say this. In that, we recognize that we were in control of nothing. And we had to,
Except your own behavior.
Our behavior, but I think we were the most dedicated to our attendance and worship and asking for prayers, more than maybe we would have prior to that or after that, because
So there's a good side to it in certain ways, right?
Yeah, in a certain way, yes. We were driven to recognize we are not in control. We cannot do this on our own. We have to rely on God to see us through this because He literally walked us through that.
But had you been of the other type of person, you would have gotten some of the steam would have gotten let off, but over time you would not have had a good conscience and not been drawn closer to God. That's my point. And so that's the digging down a little deeper in what this actually looks like in real life to see those kind of things. But none of this is pleasant. And I don't think it's meant to be pleasant. It's not easy to do. And we've all probably experienced or will experience something like this in our life. This is the nature of it. I was just reading yesterday, I think it was yesterday, two things. And I don't know how I read these two things. One of them was an essay on the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, Uncle Tom today is put forth as a very negative figure, especially as an accusation against a black person, that somebody is an Uncle Tom, means he cooperates with white people. It's completely distorted. If you read the book Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is a very strong anti-slavery book from 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote the book, 100 years before I was born. Uncle Tom is the hero of the book as a man of devout Christian character who is actually a type of figure of Christ who's put to death because he has a good conscience and won't do wrong. He will not speak evil of the other slaves and turn them in. He does the right thing and he's put to death for it. So Uncle Tom is a hero. But it got turned around in modern high schools and colleges to be he was a bad person for some reason, because they've never read the book. He was a man, if you go read the book, you will see Tom in the book was a man who endured griefs, suffering wrongfully, and did it with a good conscience. An honorable man. And then there's George Washington Carver. From the time of the Civil War up through the 1930s and 40s, George Washington Carver was the most famous black man in the United States. He was the most highly accomplished black man in the United States, and wrote several books and lectured everywhere as a former slave, and had educated himself, become college educated, and spoke everywhere at the top level of society. But today, when W.E.B. Du Bois came along, who was a Marxist, he just slandered this man, and now the reputation of George Washington Carver is he's some kind of a weak, bad person. But George Washington Carver was anything but a weak and bad. He was a man who endured the griefs of slavery, suffered wrongfully, and did what was good and right, and became an honor to all those around him, black or white. He was an honorable man. That's what he was thought of for decades. So there's a couple things, they get twisted around in our modern times because of people's political agendas. But those are the kind of people that are prime examples of what he's talking about here in the real world, who endured grief, suffering wrongfully, and did the right thing. They should be held in honor, not the radical Marxists who tried to replace them and defame their character, because they don't endure grief, suffering wrongfully. Now, he says, so if you're beaten for your faults and you take it patiently, but if you do good and suffer, this is commendable before God. Two things are commendable. Well, it's really the same thing. Taking it patiently is commendable, and suffering griefs, enduring wrongfully. Then he says, and here's the catch. For to this you were called. Who's the you here? Well, it's all the Christians, not just any servant. All of you were called to this ideal of a person who is willing to suffer for doing what's right. Because Christ also suffered, leaving for us an example that you should follow his steps. And here's his example. He quotes the Old Testament, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth. He didn't lie about his boss. He didn't slander anybody. Didn't blaspheme. Didn't speak evil. Who, when he was reviled, spoken evil of, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten. But he committed himself to him who judges righteously. Now this goes on, but let's stop right there. So here's the example. Who set this example? This is not the modern example of aggression, of assertiveness, of never taking anything from anybody, blah, blah, blah. This is not the modern example. This is the example of Christ. I want you to think about that word example for a minute. It's an interesting word. In Greek, it means overriding. I'll give the illustration. Maybe some of you can. There's several ways this comes to us, but when I was at elementary school, maybe up through junior high, I don't even know how. Around the top of the room, anybody know what was all the way around the top of the room? So it's in green and white. What was it up there? Do you know? Did you go to the same kind of school I did? Huh? The alphabet, written in cursive, usually. The alphabet was up there all the way around the room. That's the overriding. What's that?
Not anymore. We don't teach cursive anymore.
What?
We don't teach cursive anymore.
I know, that's the whole point I'm making. We're wrong. Cursive activates parts of the brain that regular writing doesn't. Anyway, we'll see the effects. But anyway, you don't teach cursive, and we don't teach writing either. Not even how to write, much less how to write it, not even how to write a full sentence. We don't teach that either, much less how to actually write it. Handwriting was the only course I ever got an F in. Entire school career, 20 years or whatever it was, I got an F in 3rd grade writing. Handwriting. And I know that was because I had a brain injury, cerebral palsy. That's what I thought. My dad didn't think so. And then I got across a paper I wrote in the 7th grade or 6th grade, your handwriting is sinful. This was from an atheist teacher. It must have been really bad if an atheist called it sinful. But anyway, so bear that in mind here. What were you supposed to do with that? Well, in the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, you'd get a sheet of paper from the teacher. Not Stacy, some other real teacher would give you this back then. And it would have alphabet written across the top, and it'd have all these little blue lines. What were you supposed to do? Take your little fat pencil and write A like it was up there, and write the other A, and then go to B. You try to look at the letter at the top of the page, the overwriting, the writing on the top, and then you try to imitate the writing below. That's what you were supposed to do. That's how they taught you how to read perfectly. I had a teacher in the 4th grade, my favorite teacher of all time, Miss Alma Williams. And she was unusual in my elementary school, even though we had, very integrated school. She was a black teacher. She is the best teacher I ever had. And man, she could write on that chalkboard, and her writing looked exactly like the writing on the thing. I'd never seen anybody like it. She had the most perfect handwriting I've ever seen. And we all sat there in amazement. We thought, well, this must be easy. Look at her. Okay. Then they gave you the fat pencil, and you couldn't do anything. Overwriting. That's what. And in Greek, they would do it on a tablet, a slate tablet. The teacher would write something, and then the student had to imitate it. So, what does this mean here? Christ left you an example that you should follow in his steps. Now, that's another important word. The example is Christ overrode how we should act in disregard of submission and taking suffering. And he left, and we're supposed to try to imitate that in our little way down below. That's what this means. And then the word that we should follow his steps is this. So I've told you this story before, but bear with me. So in Ohio, it would snow sometimes. Since it would snow, we'd get up in the morning and there'd be snow, and here's my dad's car out there in the driveway, and it'd be snow, and he would leave for work before we left for left for school. And so he would walk out to his car again and drive away. And then after a little bit, me and my brothers had to go to catch the school bus. So we'd see these blanket of snow, and we'd see these footsteps. So what do you think us little boys try to do? We tried to put our feet right exactly inside his footsteps in the snow. And we tried to match his steps. Sometimes you didn't do it right. You didn't do it well. You messed everything up. But we tried to put our feet where his feet had walked all the way out as far as we could. That is exactly what this word means. It means following in a footprint that's been left for you. Putting your feet in the footprint that's been left. So there's pretty strong words, aren't they? Examples, word pictures of what we're supposed to be doing. So we need to spend a lot of time figuring out how did Jesus and the apostles act and what this means. And he committed no sin. His mouth wasn't full of deceit, slander, misrepresentation, defending yourself unnecessarily, finding fault with others. You can use a lot of synonyms for this deceit. And when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he was suffered, he did not threaten. I'll use this illustration too before. So me and my brothers would get in fights all the time with each other over stuff. Boys are always fighting and wrestling. We would try to wrestle and figure out how to get on top of the other kid that we're fighting, usually a brother, sometimes other people. And me and my brother, we tried to get our knee, because you get yourself on top of your brother on the ground, what's he going to do? He's going to try to throw you off, whatever. So you try to get it so that you got your knees on his shoulders and you got his hands pinned to the ground. And then you can say whatever you want to say. Okay? I used to let my nose bleed on them because they used to hit me in the nose. My nose, I let my nose bleed on them so they wouldn't do it again. Anyway. But while you're pinned down to the ground, if you're the one on the bottom pinned down to the ground, what are you doing? Are you taking it patiently? Oh no, you're reviling. You're saying what you're threatening. When I get out, you're threatening is what you're doing. So we see this all the time growing up. We see this when you're pinned down to the ground, and Dee Dee said you didn't have any power, right? That's your own word. You didn't have any power in this situation. Okay, what do people do when they don't have any power? Well, they threaten is what they do, and they revile is what they do. He says, no, that's not what you should do. You have footsteps to follow. You have overriding to follow to say how this should be. And so instead of that, you commit yourself to him that judges righteously. What you say is, Lord, you know this is unjust and unfair, and I turn this over to you in that sense. You're going to make it all right someday. You can even be angry about it. You say, God will take care of all this. You don't even tell them that. You have to you say it to yours. You commit. Christ, hanging on the cross, committed himself to him that judges righteously because he knew God would straighten it all out. He couldn't. He had no power. But God did. Now, this is the way Christians have to live in this situation. And so, who himself bore our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, having died to sins, might live for righteousness, by whose stripes you're healed. For we're like sheep going astray. But now I've returned to the shepherd and overseer of our souls. Okay, we'll talk about that more next week. But this is the gist of this section. That Christ left us an example of submission in the face of suffering, especially suffering wrongfully. He left us an example in the face of that. That we have to try to figure out how to live. And we might individually differ on how that would actually look and stuff, but we can't forsake the example. And we can't negate this example of how it ought to be in this case. Anybody want to say anything? I've been doing a lot of talking here. All right, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very much. We'll pick up again next week, the Lord willing.